What's happening, everybody? Welcome back to the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Thanks for joining me today. Let's start off with some news and notes from Friday. As I mentioned yesterday, I had to record my episode for Saturday a little bit early due to being down in Milwaukee on Friday. So wanted to catch up on a couple things. First of all, Dean Lowry signing with the Minnesota Vikings. I think this is probably one of those moves that most Packer fans aren't going to be too upset about. He ends up going, of course, in the division to a NFC North team, which is just a trend that keeps giving over and over year after year. We've already seen a couple moves this year, including now Dean Lowry to the Minnesota Vikings, Robert Tonyan to the Chicago Bears. So, of course, that's just the way that it goes in the NFC North. But Dean Lowry ends up in Minnesota, and Lowry's had a interesting career, and it's been one of those things where in 2019, 2020, he struggled, and a lot of the angst and frustration about Dean Lowry is from those couple seasons, and especially in some of the run defense issues in 2019 towards the end of that year. 2020, I thought he struggled, and then they brought him back in 2021, and I was like, what are you possibly doing? Like, you saw the last couple seasons, and he played poorly. And then the first 3 games of 2021, it was the exact same thing. It was 3 games that did not perform well. And then all of a sudden, Dean Lowry had a really, really good rest of 2021. And unfortunately, it was like one of those things where like people had preconceived notions at that point. We're like, oh, Dean Lowry's the worst. And, kind of always constantly lumped, Dean Lowry and Tyler Lancaster together and get rid of these guys and so on and so forth. Had a really nice remainder of 2021 after those first few games. Then in 2022, he was fine. Nowhere near as bad as I think a lot of people thought. Wasn't as good as he was in 2021, especially again after those first few games. But overall, like a sort of up and down career. This is a former day 3 pick that I think Green Bay ultimately got pretty good value in return for, considering where he was drafted. So not quite, I think, the player that at the beginning, like some people thought he was going to be a little bit better, and then he kind of, like I said, had that downward trajectory, then kind of popped back up and then kind of evened out. So never quite as bad over the last couple seasons as a lot of people I think thought he was, but not the solution at this point in his career either. So moving to Minnesota for, I think it was a pretty decent sized deal for Lowry, all things considered. Like I said, I don't think too many fans are going to be too upset by that. It's interesting that Minnesota has been prioritizing some of these Packers defensive players, right? Zadarius Smith last year, Chandon Sullivan last year, now Dean Lowry this year. We'll see if, Z ultimately ends up being back or not, but either way, Dean Lowry on his way to the Minnesota Vikings, and Green Bay will see him 2 times this upcoming season. All right, meanwhile, the Packers go out and actually sign a player of their own. They get Tarvarius Moore from the San Francisco 49ers. He was a former 3rd-round pick. If you remember, he was a very late riser in his draft. He was somebody that not a lot of people knew about. Actually, Ben Fennell was actually one that recognized his talents and was telling people about him and kind of getting him hyped up right along the draft. I'm not saying that NFL teams didn't know about him. Clearly they did, but he was one of the ones that was really high on Tarvarius Moore coming out of the draft, and like I said, really kind of brought attention to him. And then he ends up going late in the 3rd round. Like I said, a late riser in that draft. Spent his entire career with the 49ers up until this point. This is going to shock absolutely nobody. He was an insane tester at the athletic combine, a 9.7 RAS score. Again, if you're not familiar, basically means that he is in the 97th percentile of the players at the same position. In his case, at safety, he's 6 foot, 200 pound, 4.3, 240, just blazing speed. Tested through the roof in just about everything, and one of those players that when you pop on the tape, he absolutely looks the part of starting safety in the NFL. Now, his trajectory's been a little bit interesting as well. Played 232 snaps as a rookie at safety, 240 snaps in his 2nd year, then had a nice 3rd-year jump, played 541 snaps at safety, then had an Achilles injury in 2021, and only played 60 snaps on defense in 2022, including the playoffs. So he became much more of a special teams player in his career. So far, he has 1,073 defensive snaps, 1,193 special team snaps, those numbers per Pro Football Focus. Special teams grade last year per PFF was a 57.7. Remember, their baseline scale is about a 60, so they ranked him as a little bit of a below average special teams player this past season. And then his PFF grade on defense was a 64.7. Again, that was only in 60 snaps, but he had a 60.2 grade in 541 snaps in 2020. So right around even at safety for Tarvarius Moore. He has struggled in coverage a little bit. He's given up a 112.5 passer rating in coverage with 6 touchdowns and 1 interception during his time in the league. And that's, again, obviously his defensive stats. In the regular season in his career, he's made 13 starts. He's defended 6 passes, had 2 forced fumbles, 1 fumble recovery, easy for me to say, no sacks, no interceptions. That 1 interception that I mentioned previously was in a postseason game. So hasn't exactly had a ton of impact in the games that he has played in, even in those 13 games as a career starter. The good side for Tarvarius Moore, besides the obvious point that he tested through the roof and is an incredible athlete, is very limited wear and tear over 5 seasons. So like I said, about 1,000 special team snaps, about 1,000 defensive snaps. Did have that Achilles injury a couple seasons ago, but had no wear or tear from that season to show for it. And again, he only played 60 snaps a season ago. About 200 to 300 snaps, I think, on special teams, if I remember correctly. So over the last 2 seasons, he has extremely limited wear and tear on his body, and he only turns 27 in August. So despite being in the league for 5 years, still in the prime of his career, and hasn't had that real true opportunity to kind of have that breakout season or breakout performance. So maybe that's something that's still possible for him, although I wouldn't necessarily bank on that moving forward. Now, terms of the deal were not disclosed as of this point, so we don't know how much he's set to make. I would assume it is very much on the cheaper end. I do not expect him to get any sort of exorbitant contract, but that will go a long way in determining the value for Moore. If they got him, again, on the cheaper side, closer to a vet minimum, I really like the signing for Green Bay. If they paid anything more than that, then it starts getting a little bit iffy because you're playing for the athletic upside more than you are for his actual play on the field so far. Now, he did play his most snaps a season ago was actually in the wild card game. He played 18 snaps against the Seattle Seahawks in that wild card game, all in garbage time, mostly in pass defense because they were trying to pass their way back into the game. It left a little bit to be desired. Now, it's 18 snaps in garbage time. So this is not exactly a large sample size, but when watched the all 22 from those 18 snaps, the coverage was a little bit off. Not anything that you were like, okay, he's like super aggressive or like, it was mostly zone coverage. So there's nothing major to take away there. But I guess the bigger thing was like the effort in coverage. It was just like, he was kind of backing off and like not coming up. And you might be saying, well, he's playing safe in that situation. That's one thing, but they completed a pass right in front of him and like in his zone and like barely made a play on it. The tackle was just basically leaning a shoulder into him, didn't wrap up. Luckily, he got him to the ground, but didn't make a wrap up tackle. Like I said, the effort was a little bit inconsistent. And then of course, in true Packers defensive backs fashion, did have a miscommunication in the secondary on a red zone play. He went to the outside. Everyone stayed on the outside. It looked like it was probably his misdiagnosis on the play, so he'll fit in just perfectly in Green Bay. Don't take anything too much from that. It's 18 snaps in garbage time in the wild card game against the Seattle Seahawks. And again, they're just trying to throw their way back into the game at that point. But those 18 snaps didn't do him too many favors in that specific game. But overall, like I said, definitely looks the part. He's going to be a core special team player for the Packers, assuming he ultimately makes the roster. How much guaranteed money he has in that contract will depend on if he is a lock to make this roster or if he's more of just a, hey, we're going to bring him in and he's going to have to earn his spot in training camp. I would assume this is somebody that just based on their current depth at safety is going to have a very strong chance to make the roster regardless of what his contract says. But again, if there's very minimal guarantees in there, he will have to earn that spot. And if all of a sudden they go out and draft a couple safeties, that could certainly change the calculus at the position and they could be ultimately, you know, maybe looking to go a little bit younger and maybe not have Tarvarius Moore be a core member of the team. Like I said, look for him to be more of a core special teams player who can provide some depth at safety as well. This isn't all that different than a Rudy Ford signing from a season ago. Now, Ford was a better special teams player and struggled a little bit on defense as well. But Ford, remember, came in last year, played well on special teams, but also provided really sound depth at safety and was quite honestly one of their better safeties on the field last year. So it's not to say that Tarvarius Moore can't have a similar type of impact as Rudy Ford if he gets an opportunity. And you never know. We've seen this before with Green Bay Packers, right? Rasul Douglas, Devondre Campbell. Sometimes you go and play for a defense and it just doesn't fit your specific strengths or what you do very well. Who knows? Maybe he gets in this Joe Barry defense and it fits him a little bit better, and he can go out and play the brand of football that he likes to play. He's a little bit more of a physical safety, likes playing more in the box, is usually a very sound tackler, so and that goes to his special teams prowess as well. So I do think there is a potential fit here, and this is something that Green Bay's done a good job of identifying in the past. Maybe a player who hasn't played very many snaps defensively, but has that height, weight, speed profile, and potentially can come in and fit their system a little bit better. Remember, Joe Barry loves keeping his two safeties deep. So if you have that athleticism, can play your half of the field, and you're a good tackler, can come up in the run game and fill your gap, those type of players have a role in this defense. So again, think very much like Rudy Ford from a season ago. Speaking of which, when this originally signed, I tweeted it out immediately for Tarvarius Moore. I'm like, oh, that might not be the best sign in the world for Rudy Ford, because this is, like I said, a very similar player to Rudy Ford. He kind of has the same skill set. He's kind of had the same struggles in coverage previously in his career. Core special teams guy. You're not expecting him to be a core safety. And all of a sudden, right after the signing takes place, it's announced that the Packers re-signed Rudy Ford. It is 1 year, up to $2.5 million, which is a great deal for Rudy Ford. He certainly earned it. Keyshawn Nixon and Rudy Ford were two of my favorite players to watch last season, not only on special teams, but on defense as well. This defense was so starved for players in the secondary who could just come up and tackle and hit, and Rudy Ford and Keyshawn Nixon just played with a different intent. They're special teams guys, right? They're scrappy, they're tenacious, they know how to get after things, and this defense desperately needed that in the secondary. And I thought Nixon and Rudy Ford provided that. Ford fell off a little bit more as the season progressed. His coverage is still going to be a little bit of an issue, but he also proved that he can come in and make plays, he can come in and tackle, and he can be a adequate safety when you need him to just come in and be that filler. Well, I think like a number 3 safety is a really good spot for Ford, and you might be thinking, number 3 safety sounds great, but look at the depth chart. Like right now, Rudy Ford's a starter, and you're not wrong, right? It's probably Darnell Savage and Rudy Ford right now. I'm sure Green Bay would still love to get off of Savage's contract, but the only way they can do that is by facilitating a trade. I don't necessarily think that that's going to happen, although it would be pretty spectacular if they found a way to make that work. But as of right now, you're right. I think Rudy Ford and Darnell Savage are probably the starters at safety, although we did see Savage play a little bit better in the slot. Rasul Douglas maybe could move back there, so we shall see. But Rudy Ford, I love the 1 year up to $2.5 million. That likely means that there's some incentives tied in there as well. Rudy Ford turns 29 in November, so he's not exactly young anymore, but I do ultimately like this signing still and think this makes really good sense, especially for Rich Bisaccia's special teams. Which brings us to our overarching theme of this offseason so far. No, not the main one, not the core one, not the Aaron Rodgers one that we've gone back and forth on through the entirety of this offseason, but what Green Bay actually has done this offseason. And they haven't officially made a trade for Aaron Rodgers or of Aaron Rodgers yet, but they have made a variety of moves that have one theme in common. Those moves so far, they've re-signed Keyshawn Nixon, they re-signed Tyler Davis, they signed Matt Orzik, they signed Tarvarius Moore, and they re-signed Rudy Ford. The 5 things in common, quite clearly, quite obviously, are special teams. Keyshawn Nixon, obviously, first team All-Pro returner a season ago, and also can be a core special teamer even outside of that. Tyler Davis, core special teamer, played over 300 snaps on special teams, and by the way, played them pretty darn well. I know Tyler Davis takes on a lot of crap, and he had a really crappy training camp and preseason a year ago. I really liked his tape the previous year when Green Bay first signed him. Just an effort player, gives a lot of effort in blocking. Not a good blocker quite yet, and I wouldn't put him in that category, but he gives effort as a blocker, which is half the battle when you're a little bit of an undersized tight end. I actually think he has a little bit of juice and a little bit of potential run after the catch ability if he actually gets an opportunity. And he's played very well on special teams, especially last year. So he's a core special teamer for them. Matt Orzik, they actually go out and get a long snapper in free agency, somebody that is probably going to take Jack Coco's spot or at least give him competition in camp, but I would give a heavy nod to Orzik moving forward. They signed Tarvarius Moore, who we just talked about, core special teams guy, and they re-signed Rudy Ford, a core special teams guy. So this is something that they have specifically gone out once again and targeted special teams this specific offseason. And to me, this makes a ton of sense. Remember, funds are extremely limited for Green Bay. Aaron Rodgers, when he gets traded, they had him on the cap for $31 million. That's going to accelerate to $40 million based on his signing bonuses that are all going to accelerate into this year because they're going to trade him pre-June 1st. So they're going to pay $9 million more to have Aaron Rodgers not on the team than if he were actually on the roster this year. Plus, they did not get the full voided contract from David Bakhtiari. It seems like they did not restructure Pat O'Donnell or do anything with Pat O'Donnell. They took advantage of every other basic opportunity that they had to sort of restructure the contracts on their current roster. There's a couple small things that they can still do, but they just have extremely limited funds available. And they basically made the moves on offense and defense that they kind of could already. The key signing on offense was re-signing Elton Jenkins. They kept Aaron Jones. They could have moved on. They decided to keep him. They kept Preston Smith on defense. They could have moved on. They decided to keep him. Same thing with Rasul Douglas. They decided to keep him. Trading Aaron Rodgers away is, of course, a major move as well. But now it's going to be really up to the draft to fill in on offense and defense for this upcoming season. So with those limited funds, what they decided to go out and do is continue to feed the special teams. And this makes so much sense in 2023. First of all, you're building upon the progress from 2022. You're continuing the momentum for Rich Bisaccia's special teams that you really started in earnest a season ago and really started to see some of the return on investment on that towards the end of last year. And this has been a decades-long issue for Green Bay in special teams, right? So while I've been very adamant that this is not the time for one-year deals or to get older players or veterans and you should be building through the draft and younger players and things like that, right? That is all well and good, but because these special teams contracts are not exorbitant contracts, they're on the cheaper side, and because special teams has been basically a decades-long issue, I am totally good with you continuing to build the culture of special teams in Green Bay. I think that has a lot of value and value that can continue to progress into 2024, 2025, 2026, even if a Rudy Ford or a Keyshawn Nixon or a Tarvarius Moore or some of these guys aren't there in 2025, etc. I do still think you continuing to build this culture of special teams in the right direction has the ability to pay major dividends down the road. As I mentioned, this was an issue for a very, very long time, and going from a decades-long issue on special teams to trying to get that to actually be a top 10 special teams is not a overnight process. That is something that takes a lot of time, effort, energy, and commitment. I can't think of anyone that'd be better for the job than Rich Bisaccia. I think he's doing a tremendous job so far. He's shown that he has an eye for talent as well by going out and getting Keyshawn Nixon and Rudy Ford and those type of players a season ago who made not only an impact on special teams, but made an impact on defense as well. The hope is that guys like Tarvarius Moore can certainly be that as well. So I love that they are progressing on special teams and understanding that this is not a just overnight solution, that they are going to have to continue to build this culture in Green Bay. They're getting the players that Rich Bisaccia needs, and hopefully this can become a real true whether it's a top 10, top 5, top 15, it just, as long as we continue to see progress in the right direction and that special teams in maybe a year, 2 years, 3 years can really be a true strength of this team, then these type of signings to me can be extremely valuable. And I love the culture that Rich Bisaccia is building for this special teams moving forward. I joked on Twitter for the longest time ever. We have seen what this team can do with an amazing offense and an atrocious special teams. Maybe now we're going to see what this team can do with an amazing special teams and maybe not the best offense in the world. I'm just joking. I'm excited to see what this offense and Jordan Love can do in 2023, but I do like the overarching idea of continuing to build Rich Bisaccia's special teams, which has clearly been a goal of theirs this offseason so far. That's going to do it for me today. I will be right back here tomorrow. So make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Appreciate all the likes, the comments, etc. I will see you guys tomorrow. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.